The city's skyline glistened with raindrops under the pale glow of street lamps, each light shimmering like diamonds scattered across black velvet. Evelyn Hart, CEO of Hart Global Technologies, stepped out of her sleek black town car, her breath forming small puffs in the cool night air. She tugged her tailored trench coat tighter around her, the faint scent of airport coffee still clinging to her clothes. She wasn't supposed to be here, not yet. Her itinerary had her in Dubai for 3 more days, entangled in tense negotiations that had stretched on far longer than she'd planned. But the deal had closed early, and for once, she had made a decision without consulting anyone: she would go home. The doorman's eyes widened as he saw her approach, umbrella in hand. "Ms. Hart. You're back early," he stammered, as though uncertain if she was real. Evelyn offered a faint smile, the kind that barely reached her eyes. "Flight changes happen." Inside the lobby, the scent of polished wood and fresh orchids welcomed her. She nodded to the concierge, bypassing the usual small talk. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she stepped into her private elevator, a sound she had missed more than she expected. The mirrored walls reflected her sharp features, high cheekbones, dark hair pulled into a neat chignon, and eyes that looked more tired than she liked to admit. She leaned back against the panel, closing her eyes for the 30-second ascent to the top floor. All she wanted was silence. The elevator chimed softly. She stepped into her penthouse, the familiar space wrapping around her like a well-tailored coat, quiet, refined, predictable. Or so she thought. She set down her designer carry-on on the marble console table. Her coat slipped from her shoulders as she inhaled the faint, sweet scent of fresh lilies arranged in a crystal vase by the door. But beneath that, something else reached her senses. Something entirely out of place. Music. It was faint at first, just a ripple in the air, but it grew clearer with each step she took down the hallway. The melody was soft, almost hesitant, as if the player was pouring their heart into each note but afraid someone might hear. Her pulse quickened. No one played her mother's piano, not the cleaning staff, not her guests, not even herself. It had been untouched for years, a relic from another life, before boardrooms and billion-dollar deals replaced the warmth of home. Evelyn's heels slowed to a careful, deliberate pace. The living room was just ahead, and the music grew fuller, richer, a slow, aching piece that tugged at something deep in her chest. She rounded the corner and stopped dead. The dim light from the floor lamp cast a golden halo over the grand piano. And there, seated on the bench, was not a hired pianist or an unexpected guest, but a man in a janitor's uniform. His hands moved over the keys with practiced grace, eyes closed, expression raw with emotion, as if each note carried a memory only he could hear. Evelyn's breath caught. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She could only stand there, frozen, as her world shifted in the quietest, most unexpected way. The final note of the melody lingered in the air like a sigh before fading into silence. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Evelyn stood half-hidden in the shadowed archway, watching the man's fingers hover over the keys as if reluctant to let go of the song. Then, he opened his eyes. They were warm brown, but there was something behind them, something weary, guarded. When his gaze found her, his entire body stiffened. Ms. Hart," he stammered, quickly rising from the bench. His hands fumbled at his uniform shirt, brushing off invisible dust. I didn't know you were back." Evelyn stepped forward, her heels muffled by the thick cream rug. "Clearly." Her tone was even, but her mind was a storm. "Why is my janitor playing my mother's piano? How does he even know how?" He took a small step back, almost as if expecting her to be angry. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I shouldn't have touched it. I was just dusting," and his voice trailed off, his eyes flicking toward the keys like a guilty child looking at a stolen cookie. She stopped a few feet from him, her gaze fixed on his hands, strong, calloused, but graceful in a way she hadn't expected from someone who spent his days mopping floors and carrying cleaning supplies. You weren't dusting, she said softly. You were playing. His jaw tightened. Yes, ma'am. Silence hung between them, filled only by the faint hum of the city through the glass walls. Evelyn tilted her head slightly, studying him. What's your name? Daniel, he replied. Daniel Cruz. Daniel, she repeated, as if tasting the sound of it. You play well. He gave a small, almost self-deprecating smile. Not well enough to make a living at it. Something in his tone, a mix of resignation and quiet pain, caught her attention. She had heard voices like that before, in the rare moments when her father had spoken about giving up his dreams to run the family business. You've been hiding this, she said, gesturing to the piano. His eyes dropped to the floor. It's not something I talk about. Not anymore. Evelyn's brows furrowed. She wasn't sure why, but she wanted to know more, not just about his music, but about him. This wasn't the kind of curiosity she usually entertained. As CEO, she dealt in resumes, statistics, and performance metrics, not personal stories. But something about Daniel's presence by her mother's piano felt different. You can tell me, she said quietly. Why were you playing that piece? His lips parted, then closed again. He seemed to weigh the risk of speaking against the weight of holding it in. Finally, he said, it was my mother's favorite. She used to play it every night before bed. When she passed, I stopped. I hadn't touched a piano in years. Evelyn's throat tightened unexpectedly. She knew that kind of grief, the kind that never fully left, the kind that still lived in the smell of lilies and the untouched keys of a piano. Daniel took a small breath and looked at her squarely. Tonight, I was just cleaning in here, and I saw the piano. I thought maybe, if I played, I could remember her the way she was. Just for a little while. Evelyn didn't respond right away. Instead, she glanced at the piano, then back at him. The man she'd barely noticed in passing, the janitor with a mop in his hands, now stood in her living room with a story she hadn't expected, one that suddenly felt tangled with her own. Evelyn stood there for a long moment, her arms loosely crossed, not out of defensiveness but in thought. Daniel's words still lingered in her mind, remember her the way she was. She glanced at the grand piano, its polished surface reflecting the warm glow of the floor lamp. Her late mother had loved that piano, her delicate hands coaxing life from ivory keys on quiet evenings. Evelyn hadn't heard it played since the funeral. In her mind, the instrument had become a silent monument, too sacred to touch. And yet, the sound Daniel had coaxed from it tonight had filled the room with something she hadn't realized she'd been missing. Sit down, she said suddenly. Daniel hesitated, blinking. Ma'am. She gestured toward the bench. Play it again. His eyes searched hers, wary, as if trying to determine if this was a trap or a genuine request. You're sure? Yes, she said, softer this time. I want to hear it. Slowly, he lowered himself back onto the bench, adjusting the hem of his uniform shirt. His fingers hovered above the keys for a moment before pressing down, the opening notes blooming into the air like petals unfolding in the sun. Evelyn moved closer, taking a seat in the armchair near the piano. From here, she could see his expression, the way his brow furrowed slightly, the way his eyes half closed, as if he were somewhere else entirely. The melody was slow, deliberate, and achingly beautiful. Each note seemed to carry a weight, a memory, a fragment of something lost. Evelyn felt it in her chest, that strange, bittersweet pull of nostalgia and longing. You play like you loved her very much, she murmured without realizing she'd spoken aloud. Daniel's lips curved into a faint, almost wistful smile, but he didn't look at her. I did. She believed in me before anyone else did. The word stirred something in Evelyn, a reminder of her own mother's unwavering belief in her, before business deals and headlines, before she'd learned to wear her ambition like armor. When the piece ended, Daniel let his hands rest on the keys for a moment before lifting them away. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, heavy with unspoken things. "That was," Evelyn began, then stopped. Words felt inadequate. "Thank you." Daniel gave a small nod, almost as if he didn't quite know how to respond to gratitude from someone like her. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, studying him. He was a janitor in her building, yes, but also something else, something more. A man with history in his hands and music in his bones. "Daniel," she said, her voice measured, "if I asked you to play here once in a while, would you?" He looked at her in surprise. "You'd want that?" She met his gaze evenly. "I think I might." Daniel hesitated at first. She could see it in the way his hands flexed, in the way his gaze flicked toward the door as though every instinct told him to retreat. But finally, he gave a quiet nod. "If you're sure. I can." Evelyn smiled faintly, a rare, unguarded expression. "I'm sure." That night, after the rain had stopped and the city lights glimmered through the glass walls, Daniel played again. The music curled into every corner of the penthouse, wrapping the space in something warmer than any expensive furnishing could provide. Evelyn didn't speak much, she simply listened. The next evening, he came again. And the evening after that. It wasn't part of his job. He would finish his janitorial rounds in the lower floors, then quietly take the private elevator to her penthouse. Sometimes he'd find her working at the long dining table, laptop open, eyes glued to financial reports. Other times she would be curled in the armchair with a glass of red wine, waiting for him. The music changed with the nights. Some evenings he played gentle, wistful melodies that seemed to slow the very air. Other nights his fingers flew, coaxing vibrant, racing notes that filled the room with restless energy. Evelyn found herself looking forward to it more than she cared to admit. Her days were filled with meetings, mergers, and people who measured their words around her. Daniel's music was the one thing untouched by corporate agendas or ulterior motives. One evening, as a storm rolled in and thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, she broke the silence. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Daniel didn't look up from the keys. "My mother taught me the basics. But most of it I learned on my own. Old keyboards from thrift shops, church pianos after service, anywhere I could get a few minutes alone." She tilted her head, curious. "And you never pursued it professionally?" He let out a breath that was almost a laugh, though there was no humor in it. "I tried. I even got into a music conservatory. But," he paused, fingers slowing on the keys. "Life doesn't always go the way you think. My mom got sick. I dropped out to take care of her. After she passed, the bills piled up. Playing didn't pay them. Cleaning floors did." Evelyn's chest tightened. She'd heard countless stories of sacrifice in the business world, but they were usually about people giving up family for ambition, not the other way around. "You could have kept playing," she said gently. He gave a small shrug. "Maybe. But somewhere along the way, I stopped believing it was for me." They fell into a quiet stretch, the only sound the rain beginning to tap against the windows. Evelyn's gaze wandered over to the piano, her mother's piano, and she thought about how it had been silent for so long, as if it too had been holding its breath until Daniel's hands brought it back to life. "You know," she said after a moment, "my mother used to say music was the only language everyone understood. I didn't believe her at the time. I thought numbers were more universal." Daniel smiled faintly. "And now?" She considered her answer carefully. "Now. I think she might have been right." From that night on, the music became a quiet ritual between them. She didn't tell anyone, not her assistant, not the board, not even her closest friend. It was theirs, a secret tucked between the marble floors and glass walls of her private world. And in those moments, she saw something shift in him, too. The guarded man who had once stood in her living room like he didn't belong now sat at the piano with a quiet confidence, his posture easing, his expression softening. One Friday evening, as he played a delicate, lilting piece, Evelyn noticed something she hadn't before, a worn leather bracelet on his wrist, frayed at the edges. She'd seen it in passing, but tonight, curiosity got the better of her. "What's that?" she asked. Daniel glanced down. "This? It was my mom's. She wore it when she played. Said it brought her luck." Evelyn's gaze lingered on it. "Does it work?" He gave her a small, thoughtful smile. "Maybe it does. After all, it brought me here." She didn't respond right away, but her mind caught on those words, replaying them in the soft glow of the lamplight. And somewhere deep down, she wondered if fate had been at work, if this unexpected crossing of their paths had been meant to happen all along. It was a Saturday night when everything changed. The city outside shimmered under the glow of thousands of lights, but the penthouse was quiet except for the rich, resonant sound of Daniel's playing. Evelyn sat on the edge of the sofa, a glass of wine in her hand, watching him. His eyes were closed, his fingers moving with effortless precision, each note spilling into the air like something too pure to be touched. She didn't know why, but tonight felt different. There was a certain urgency in the way he played, a swell of emotion that made her throat tighten. When the last note faded, he didn't immediately open his eyes. He sat there, hands resting lightly on the keys, breathing slow and deep. "That was beautiful," she said softly. He gave a faint nod but didn't smile. "It's called The Last Performance. My mom wrote it before she passed." Evelyn's brows rose. She was a composer. Daniel's gaze dropped. "She was, more than that. She was my teacher, my biggest supporter, my only family. And she told me, before she died, that I should never stop sharing music, no matter how small the audience." There was something in his tone, a quiet finality, that made Evelyn lean forward. "Daniel, why do I get the feeling there's more you haven't told me?" He hesitated, his fingers tracing the edge of the keys. "Because there is." The air between them shifted. Evelyn set down her glass, her executive instincts kicking in, the same instincts that could sense when a deal had hidden clauses. "Tell me." Daniel drew a slow breath, then looked up at her. "I wasn't just some kid trying to make it in music. I was making it. I had a recording deal lined up. A scholarship to one of the top conservatories in the country. People were calling me a prodigy." Evelyn blinked, caught off guard. "What happened?" "My mom got sick. Stage 4 cancer. I walked away from everything to take care of her. By the time," his voice faltered. "By the time she was gone, the industry had moved on. My savings were gone too. And no one was waiting for me anymore." Evelyn felt a pang in her chest, not pity, but something deeper, sharper. "You could still." He shook his head. "It's not that simple. I've been out of it too long. And honestly." He looked at her directly now, his expression raw. "I'm scared. Scared to try again and find out I'm not who I used to be." For a long moment, she didn't speak. She knew fear. Not the kind that kept people from paying bills, she had never lacked for money, but the kind that made people cling to the safe path instead of risking the fall. She had built an empire on taking those risks. "Daniel," she said quietly, "you still have it. I hear it every time you play. And if you're telling me you'd rather mop floors for the rest of your life than find out if the world still wants your music," she let the sentence hang. His jaw tightened. "It's not about mopping floors. It's about, not losing what's left of me if I fail." Evelyn stood, walking to the piano. She rested a hand lightly on the glossy wood. "And what if you gain everything?" He looked at her, as if trying to read whether she truly meant it. She did. "I can help you," she continued. "Not because I feel sorry for you. Not because I think you need saving. But because the world is full of noise, Daniel, and your music is rare. It's worth hearing. Silence stretched between them, charged and fragile. Finally, he exhaled a shaky breath. Why? Why would you care? Evelyn's lips curved, but it wasn't quite a smile. Because I know what it's like to have someone believe in you when you don't believe in yourself. And because my mother was right, music is the only language everyone understands. Yours just happens to speak louder than most. Something in his expression softened, the tension in his shoulders easing. For the first time, he didn't look like the janitor who had been caught in the wrong place. He looked like a man standing at the edge of something vast, uncertain, and full of possibility. All right, he said finally, his voice low. If I try, it's not because I think I can. It's because, maybe you're right. Evelyn extended her hand. Then let's see where it takes you. He took it. Firm, steady. Weeks later, the world outside would know Daniel Cruz as a name worth remembering. But for Evelyn, the true beginning wasn't his first performance back on stage. It was this night, in the quiet of her penthouse, where music bridged two lives that never should have crossed, but somehow did. And every time he played her mother's piano, she knew they were both keeping promises, his to his mother, and hers to herself, to never let the music go silent again.